Media reporting on misogyny. The media is often criticized for its reluctance or outright failure to frame issues and events within the broader context of misogyny. And there are a number of reasons for this, not least of which being a lack of understanding of what misogyny is. The test of misogyny is not whether you love your mother, sisters, wife, and daughters and care about their opportunities and welfare. The test is whether you care about the opportunities and welfare of women who don't give you love, attention, and affection. Kate Manne, an Australian philosopher and author whose work is primarily in feminist philosophy, moral philosophy, and social philosophy, defines misogyny not as a deep hatred in the heart harbored by men toward women and girls, but as social systems or environments where women face hostility and hatred because they're women in a man's world. Misogyny is a result of a patriarchal society. Misogyny can afford to be selective because its fundamental goal is enforcement. Women who know their place do not need to be put in it. Claiming that women are subjected to misogyny can be demonstrated quite simply when a male counterpart is held up as a comparator. Holding fixed the intersections of identity related to race, class, sexuality, age, ability, and so on, one need only demonstrate that the male counterpart is not or would not be subjected to the same hostility in terms of tone, quantity, frequency, or intensity.
I experienced sexism throughout my life, but I don't even think about sexism because we're just sort of used to sexism. Misogyny is something else, and I didn't quite understand what the difference was. I didn't quite understand why. When I worked in construction and worked with mostly men, or I worked at John Deere, there was some sexism there, but I didn't feel what I was feeling. I wasn't coming up against this kind of negativity. And after reading this book, I came to the understanding through her description of misogyny. It talks about power. And when we're in a position of power, just by the mere fact that we're there, we're just automatically threatening because we're taking a position that's traditionally been held by somebody else. And women are seen to be caring. And when we're in that position, then they start to see us as maybe not caring.
There are a number of movements that encourage misogyny and have not been reported on appropriately in and of themselves or when they lead to deadly events, though we are beginning to see this change. Involuntary celibates or incels. Pickup artists. Men going their own way. Men's rights activists or MRAs. Involuntary celibates or incels are the most violent corner of what is known as the manosphere, which comprises the online communities where these men communicate with each other. Incels are, because of being romantically or sexually rejected by women, devoted to a violent hatred of women, and also generally hold views that are far-right, white nationalist, or white supremacist in nature. Women of color are particularly targeted with violence and harassment, though they are not the objects of sexual desire for these men. Rather, they are women who would not be permitted to breed if incels had their way. The entire focus of these groups is violence against women for depriving men of that to which these men feel entitled. Community members engage in shockingly little self-reflection to consider why they might be experiencing this rejection. Pickup artists as a movement are not what we imagine when we think of cheesy pickup lines proffered by people in bars hoping to get a date and maybe start a relationship. Instead, pickup artists are a multi-million-dollar international industry of self-proclaimed experts who, ironically, are usually single, and who sell their tips, tricks, boot camps, and books to men who have been unlucky in their romantic lives and are looking for advice. When you do a deep dive into what is being sold, it ends up being advice on how to harass, stalk, and sexually assault women. While incels despair of ever having sex, pickup artists pursue it relentlessly, including if that means harming women to get the sex to which they feel entitled. Men going their own way are men who have decided that they want to be far away from women, or at least far away from meaningful romantic relationships with women. They are men who might have friendships or one-night stands with women, but generally adhere to an isolationist approach to life. Their ideology is based in the belief that women are toxic and dangerous. Men's rights activists, or MRAs, co-opted and redirected what used to be the men's liberation movement, which was supportive of feminist principles and intended to deconstruct harmful stereotypes and behaviors that are now commonly referred to as toxic masculinity, and the ways in which patriarchy also harms men. In the early 1990s, the movement began opposing feminists and became a reaction to the emergence of feminist and multicultural activism as mainstream forces and what they perceived as the diminishing social status of cisgender heterosexual white men. Today, the online movement that uses the MRA identifier is just one part of an interconnected web of social media groups, forums, and organizations that portray women as conniving liars who are begging and deserve to be raped or worse. These are all movements that blame women for their various woes and failings in life. These are all movements that actively promote the hatred of women. These are all men who hate women. Men who follow these movements have killed women for being women. On December 6, 1989, Marc Lépine walked into a classroom at École Polytechnique screaming, "You're all feminists," before separating the women from the men and opening fire. He killed 14 women and injured 10 women and 4 men. It was years before this event began being discussed in and by the media as being anti-feminist or framed in the broader context of misogyny, despite his 3-page suicide letter, which was found in his pocket on the day of the massacre and leaked to a French-Canadian newspaper less than 1 year later, opening with, "I have decided to send the feminists who have always ruined my life to their maker," and saying that feminists want to keep the advantages of women while seizing for themselves those of men. He ended his letter with a list of 19 women and a note that said those women nearly died today. The lack of time, because I started too late, has allowed these radical feminists to survive. Even with this information available on the day of and only months following the tragedy, I will remind you that it was years before the media began to discuss the massacre in the context of misogyny and anti-feminism. Influenced by Elliot Rodger, who, on May 23, 2014, killed 6 people and injured 14 in an act of revenge against all of the women who would not have sex with him, Alec Manassian, on April 23, 2018, drove a van into a crowd of people on a busy Toronto street corner, killing 10 and injuring 15. Of the 10 dead, 8 were women, and, when interviewed by police, Manassian indicated that he was acting as part of the incel movement and taking revenge on women for rejecting him. The media did not initially frame the events and background information leading to those events as misogyny. And even when it became clear that Manassian was connected to the incel movement, there was still a lack of discussion about misogynistic ideas on websites and forums causing real offline harm. A little more than 1 year later, on June 3, 2019, Alex Stavropoulos went to a Home Depot in Sudbury, Ontario, purchased a package of utility knives, and then waited in the parking lot until a woman with a little girl and a baby were walking by. Stavropoulos attacked them, causing injury to the woman and baby because he was angry at white women and he wanted to know what it felt like to kill a little white girl. The events were reported by many media outlets as random, even though he clearly told police that he was angry with white women for not having sex with him. While the specific victims may have been randomly selected, the act itself was planned and not framed by the media as misogyny. Finally, although several more cases could be discussed, early in 2020, a 17-year-old boy, inspired by the incel community, murdered Ashley Noel Arzaga and stabbed another woman in a Toronto massage parlor. In this instance, while the media reporting is light on discussion of misogyny, the police did lay the first known charge of incel terrorism. There are numerous other events that could be provided as examples of how dangerous these misogynistic movements are. What is clear, though, even with only a few examples, is that these movements and communities must be taken seriously. And when events like this happen, the media needs to consider the wider societal context that motivates or influences these events. Reporting these stories as one-off aberrant events that are based on the actions of a single person who may or may not have mental health needs is irresponsible and dangerous. Particularly with respect to reporting these incidents as being due to mental illness, journalists need to consider how that stigmatizes people with mental health needs. They need also to consider and understand that people with mental health needs are far more likely to be victims of violence than the perpetrators of it. The reporting on these events are prime examples of how improvements in reporting could positively impact public understanding and opinion and potentially influence political and public policy. The media has the capacity to help delegitimize and undermine hate-fueled extremist ideologies, evicting them from general conversation rather than propelling them to greater prominence. And that will save women's lives.
And we are never going to be able to deal with issues of gender abuse and clergy abuse and murdered and missing women and racism and all of this mess that gets bottled up into this blender of just gross and inhumanity unless we're willing to confront it directly. And so while I understand that it's upsetting, sanitizing it is never going to get us any closer to dealing with it. Because the more you sanitize it, the more you can minimize it. That's what sanitizing does.
So I think there's, elements of systemic racism that are ever present in our society. There's systemic gender issues ever present in our society. And I think because those are already there, we need to call it out every time we see it to make people aware that this is happening and we need to push back on it.
This has been some of the other challenge for me in this. It kind of plays itself out on social media, but there's been so much mind games, I would say. It's not criticism. It's not valid political criticism. Mind games get played, and you try and describe why what they're doing is misogyny because they're not criticizing any of my colleagues, my male colleagues, in the same way for the same thing. They're coming at me, and I didn't know what hit me. I ended up listening to podcasts and reading books on power and control, narcissistic behavior, and abuse. And I realized I'm in an abusive relationship with certain people in the community, and I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to deal with it. And although I'm in a position of power, they also got me. They're my residents. I can't call it out. I can't say what it is. And when you try and explain what they're doing, they get very defensive. We're not misogynists. We love women.
We love our wives. Key takeaways. Name misogyny for exactly what it is. The words woman, girl, or gender do not have to be explicitly stated for something to be misogynistic or rooted in misogyny. Don't minimize or dismiss the possibility or seriousness of misogyny. Consider stories being told and/or as they unfold through a gender lens.